what a quick wit he was, and always had something funny to say. Always had a funny slant on whatever was happening. You know, just like you hear in his songs. That's really what he was like. He just saw the world in this very kind of special way, and it would just come out of it. You know, and I'm reminded of that when you're talking about this ability to write the way you write. I think, you know, John, very similarly, had this really natural kind of talent, and I think one of my favorite parts in the little, well, it's not little, one of my favorite parts in the songbook that we put out a few years ago called Beyond Words, which is a great John Prine songbook, you know, with lyrics and chords and some family photos and handwritten lyrics and some captions. But anyway, one of the photos in there is of him as a young teenager, maybe 14, 15, sitting at his kitchen table with a Ferris wheel or merry-go-round he had just built from an erector set. You know, those erector sets. And he's sitting there and his hair's kind of messed up because he's got kind of a funny look on his face. And he said of his experience of going from just being this guy who was writing songs for himself and then maybe playing them for his family a little bit to starting to perform in clubs to all of a sudden kind of, you know, getting all this recognition. And he said, I felt like I was playing with an erector set and had invented the neutron bomb. And that was really, I think, a realization for him early on, is that he had this really great and powerful gift. And he didn't necessarily, I don't want to say he didn't understand it, but I think he didn't question it that much, you know? He just knew he could do it, and he did it. And I think it's to his credit that he didn't overanalyze it and try to pull it apart and figure it out and, you know, change it. It was almost kind of like, you know, being a superhero or something. You know, knowing that you can do this thing, you don't know why you can do it, but you know you can rely on it and call on it, you know, when you need to. And and I think, I don't know what your impression was, but that was always kind of my, well, that's not true, not always my impression. I would say in the last 5, I don't know how many years, 5 to 10 years, let's say, I worked with John, I sort of came to that realization that this amazing, great, and wonderful talent he had, not just as a writer, but as a performer, as just a person, being with people, was a mystery even to him on some level. But he didn't question it, you know, so I think, but what was your experience?
Well, yeah, I mean, the way you express it is really kind of comprehensive. It's great. You know, for me, we just cracked each other up, sort of. I mean, that was, but not even telling, like, okay, I'll give you an example. So we went, Joan Baez was doing one of her farewell tour appearances. This was actually at the Ryman. It was at the Ryman Auditorium here in Nashville. I was visiting John and Fiona, and they brought me with them to see the Joan Baez show. And, you know, John, all right, I'll put it this way. I had this friend in 6th grade named Billy Carolyn. And Billy Carolyn could say almost nothing. So he would say, even nothing. And just, it would crack me up, you know? And I'd get in trouble for laughing at what he had said. You know, so all right. So John had that streak in him, kind of, and as you know, and so Joan Baez, in the course of a lovely evening, sings this song about a knight, you know, a knight in shining, a knight who takes this fair damsel he finds and sort of abducts her and brings her back to the castle, and you know has his way with her, right? And so, and she correctly is like, "You'll never get away with that, buddy." And she pulls the knife out of his scabbard and plunges it in his back, right? And that's the song. It's, you know. And John's sitting, we were up in the balcony at the Ryman, and John's sitting next to me, and he goes like this, really under his breath, he goes, "My back hurts." And I start giggling like an idiot. And everybody's like, "Who's that idiot?" I'm like, no, it's he. Didn't work. But I mean, he was just, but that was just one side of it. he was always, I take it back, she didn't really stab me, I don't want to offend anyone. Anyway, but John was just, he was so much fun, just the way he would express himself, even just in the least remark. You know, we exchanged texts a lot, you know. And he was whimsical. I'll tell you this too. So Jason's kind enough to mention the novels. So during the time that I knew John, so this is 2018, spring of 2018, till his departure in April 2020. During that time, we would exchange all kinds of information about different things and text messages and what have you. But one of the things that snagged his attention was he was very curious. You know, you wouldn't necessarily guess this, but in his way, he was kind of a literary guy too. You just wouldn't have like picked him out of a lineup to say that's a literary guy, you know. But he really was a reader. He was really, really smart and really, really perceptive, you know, tonally about what he was reading. So I was working on this novel. It became the Auburn Conference, which came out in 2023. And the conceit of the novel was I invented a writers' conference in 1883 with Herman Melville, Walt Whitman, Harriet Beecher Stowe, Emily Dickinson, Mark Twain, Frederick Douglass. So anyway, and the idea was they were gathered together by this very naive junior professor in this small town in upstate New York to discuss in public the future of America. And of course, everything goes off the rails, and it's, you know, so that was the book. But so John was really curious. He was always asking me questions about the book. How's it going? What's this? How do you do this? And little questions like that. And he started calling me Herman. For Herman Melville. I don't know why he snagged on that, but he would always do that. It was like a way of kind of needling me in a really generous, spirited, funny way. And I try not to cry when I say it. So anyway, the last words that I ever had from John were text. He was probably a couple days away from going into the hospital for his last go-round. But anyway, the last text I got from him, he said, "Tell Herman I said land ho." I mean, so it was, and you know, it was funny that there were these sort of sustained references, you know. This is the next chapter. Time goes by. Time passes slowly. Time passes quickly. Maybe time stands still, and we are what passes. John was not our only friend who disappeared during that cold, hard pandemic time, but he was the loss I felt most acutely. New Orleans, where I live, was as quiet as an abandoned house. Mary and I could have been on a space station orbiting the moon. The eerie emptiness of the streets that first summer. You could have taken a nap in the middle of Canal Street. Even the birds had fled the scene. The present was a vacuum, occasionally punctuated by two-dimensional faces on a flat screen. A present with no presence, an absent present. Slowly, as a year passed and part of another, the blood started to circulate again in the limbs of the city and the world. As the numbness wears off, the pain moves back in. Actual people began to enter the frame again, greeting one another as if they had just awakened from a year-long nap. In some way, that made John's absence more palpable. He was the empty chair at the table. I wished there was some way to fill that chair, bring John into the frame again, in the world, and not just in memory. Jason Wilbir was John's lead guitarist for 24 years, since he was hired to tour with the band for the 1995 album Lost Dogs and Mixed Blessings, which has just been reissued, by the way. Jason, I hate to say this in front of you, but Jason is one of the nicest people you could want to meet. He had traveled with John around the country and the world. He loved John and had known him on and off the road for parts of his life that I wasn't able to see. He had been there on the night the jukebox caught fire. That's a whole story in the book that you'll have to read the book to find out about. So on the spring morning as the pandemic waned, I headed for Bloomington, Indiana to spend an afternoon with Jason. maybe in conversation, I thought we could summon John's spirit in some way. And I think we really did that. And I learned stuff about John that I never knew from that conversation with Jason. I'll always be grateful to Jason for making himself available to do that, because it's difficult to talk about it, but it also was, I think, you know, a good thing to share.